Today, we will talk about the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious serial killers of the 20th century. This is not just another recount of his gruesome acts. Today, we're delving into the true and unabridged story, exploring the dark corridors of Dahmer's mind, the systematic failures that allowed his killing spree to continue for over a decade, and the lasting impact he left on our society. Chapter 1: Early Life. To understand the making of the Milwaukee Monster, we must begin at the very start of Jeffrey Dahmer's life. Born on May 21, 1960, in West Allis, Wisconsin, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was the first of two sons to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. From the outside, the Dahmer family seemed typical, but beneath the surface, there were significant issues that profoundly affected Jeffrey's development. Jeffrey's childhood was marked by a sense of unease and detachment. His father, Lionel, a chemist, was often preoccupied with work, while his mother, Joyce, battled severe anxiety and depression. The household was fraught with tension and frequent arguments, creating an unstable environment for young Jeffrey. Despite these challenges, Jeffrey appeared to be a happy child in his early years, showing a particular interest in animals. As Jeffrey grew older, early signs of disturbance began to emerge. His interest in animals took a dark turn. Instead of simply being fascinated by their behavior, Jeffrey became obsessed with their anatomy and dissection. Neighbors recalled instances of him collecting dead animals, sometimes even preserving their bones in jars. School life for Jeffrey was equally troubling. He struggled to fit in and was often described as shy and withdrawn. His academic performance was unremarkable, and he had difficulty forming meaningful friendships. Classmates remembered him as a loner, often retreating into his own world, where his dark interests provided a twisted form of solace. The pivotal moment in Jeffrey's early life was his parents' tumultuous relationship, which ultimately led to their divorce in 1978. The constant fighting and emotional neglect left Jeffrey feeling increasingly isolated. At the age of 14, he began drinking heavily, often consuming alcohol during school hours. This escalating behavior went largely unchecked by those around him. Abandoned and isolated, Jeffrey's dark interests and alcoholism intensified. These early years set the stage for the horrors that would later unfold, as the young boy, once seemingly innocuous, began his transformation into the Milwaukee Monster. Chapter 2: The First Murder. June 18, 1978, marked a pivotal turning point in Jeffrey Dahmer's life. At just 18 years old, Dahmer committed his first murder, setting him on a path of violence that would last for over a decade. The victim, 19-year-old Stephen Hicks, was a hitchhiker, a free spirit on his way to a rock concert. That fateful day, Dahmer, reeling from his parents' recent divorce, drove past Hicks and offered him a ride. The two shared a beer, and Dahmer invited Hicks back to his family's home under the pretense of continuing their drinking. What began as a casual encounter quickly turned deadly. Driven by a deep-seated fear of abandonment, Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a dumbbell when he tried to leave. He then strangled him to ensure his death, marking the gruesome beginning of his homicidal urges. After the murder, Dahmer was faced with disposing of the body. He dismembered Hicks's remains, placing them in garbage bags. A few weeks later, he returned to the burial site, unearthed the remains, and systematically crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, scattering the fragments in the woods. Shortly after the murder, Dahmer had a close call with law enforcement. While driving with bags of dismembered body parts, he was pulled over for a traffic violation. The officer noticed a strange odor, but accepted Dahmer's explanation that he was taking garbage to the dump. This oversight allowed Dahmer to evade detection and continue on his dark path. Stephen Hicks's disappearance went largely unnoticed by the community, and his family was left with unanswered questions. This lack of immediate attention further emboldened Dahmer, convincing him that he could outsmart the authorities and continue satisfying his horrific desires without consequence. Chapter 3: The Murder Spree begins. After the murder of Stephen Hicks, Jeffrey Dahmer's life took a chilling turn. He initially attempted to lead a semblance of normalcy, but the darkness within him soon resurfaced with renewed intensity. Dahmer's life post-first murder included a stint in the army, stationed in Germany, where his drinking intensified. After his discharge, he briefly moved to Miami, but his disturbing desires led him back to his hometown of Milwaukee. Returning to Milwaukee marked a re-establishment for Dahmer, who maintained an outwardly ordinary life while his criminal activities escalated behind closed doors. His apartment at 924 North 25th Street would become infamous as the site of unspeakable horrors. From 1987 to 1991, Dahmer's killing spree intensified. His victims were primarily young men, often marginalized and vulnerable. Names like Anthony Sears, Eddie Smith, and Conorak Synthesomphone, among others, became tragically linked to his atrocities. Dahmer's methods were horrifyingly consistent. He lured his victims with promises of money or employment, drugged them with sedatives or alcohol, and then subjected them to unspeakable acts of violence and necrophilia. His apartment served as a chamber of horrors where he committed acts that defy comprehension. As his crimes went unnoticed, Dahmer's confidence grew. He refined his techniques, preserving body parts as trophies and experimenting with acid and other methods to dispose of evidence. The patterns in his crimes, the increasing frequency, and the meticulous nature of his methods hinted at a mind unraveling into madness. The victims of Jeffrey Dahmer were more than just numbers. They were individuals with dreams, families, and futures stolen by a man consumed by darkness. Chapter 4. The Arrest. The night of July 22, 1991, marked a pivotal moment in the Jeffrey Dahmer case when Tracy Edwards narrowly escaped becoming his next victim. Edwards had been lured to Dahmer's apartment under false pretenses, only to discover the grim reality of Dahmer's intentions. Inside Dahmer's apartment, Tracy Edwards encountered a scene of horror, a place adorned with photos of dismembered bodies and a sense of imminent danger. Despite Dahmer's attempt to handcuff him, Edwards managed to break free, sprinting out into the street where he flagged down 2 police officers. The officers, initially skeptical of Edwards' story, followed him back to Dahmer's apartment. There, they were met with an unimaginable sight: photographs of dismembered bodies, jars containing preserved genitalia, and the overpowering stench of decay. Jeffrey Dahmer was subdued without incident. His calm demeanor during the arrest contrasted sharply with the gruesome evidence surrounding him. The subsequent investigation uncovered more horrors, solidifying Dahmer's reputation as one of America's most notorious serial killers. The news of Dahmer's arrest sent shockwaves through Milwaukee and beyond. The public and media were stunned by the sheer scale and brutality of his crimes. Questions swirled about how Dahmer had evaded capture for so long, and whether there were more victims yet to be discovered. Dahmer's arrest marked the beginning of the end for his reign of terror, yet it also prompted deep reflection on the failures and oversights that allowed him to operate unchecked for so many years. Chapter 5. The Trial. The legal proceedings against Jeffrey Dahmer were a harrowing journey through the depths of human depravity. Charged with 17 counts of murder, Dahmer faced a courtroom filled with the families of his victims and a nation reeling from the horror of his crimes. Dahmer's confessions during interrogation were chillingly matter-of-fact. He detailed how he lured, drugged, and ultimately killed his victims, often engaging in acts of necrophilia and dismemberment. His defense team, faced with overwhelming evidence, focused on Dahmer's troubled mental state and argued for diminished responsibility. After a trial that captivated the nation, the jury deliberated on Dahmer's fate. On February 15, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was found guilty on all counts. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the families of the victims, many of whom had endured unimaginable grief and loss. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, reflecting on the severity of Dahmer's crimes, ensured that he would never walk free again. The sentencing marked the end of a legal chapter, but the legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes continued to haunt Milwaukee and beyond. His case spurred discussions on mental health, law enforcement procedures, and the treatment of serial offenders within the criminal justice system. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial stands as a stark reminder of the darkest corners of human behavior and the enduring quest for justice in the face of unspeakable evil. Chapter 6. Life in Prison. Jeffrey Dahmer's life in prison was a stark contrast to the freedom he once enjoyed. Incarcerated at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, Dahmer's existence was tightly controlled and isolated. In prison, Dahmer initially struggled to adjust to his new reality. He kept to himself, rarely interacting with other inmates. His behavior ranged from withdrawn and contemplative to moments of intense introspection and remorse. Despite attempts to maintain a low profile, Dahmer occasionally drew attention from fellow inmates and guards alike. Some reports suggested that he was a target of other prisoners due to the notoriety of his crimes. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's life came to a sudden and violent end. He was brutally attacked by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, in the prison's gymnasium. Dahmer and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, were both killed during the altercation. Dahmer's death sent shockwaves through the public and reopened wounds for the families of his victims. While some saw Scarver's actions as a form of twisted justice, others mourned the loss of closure and the opportunity for Dahmer to face ongoing scrutiny and punishment. The circumstances surrounding Dahmer's death sparked debates about safety in prisons and the moral complexities of justice. For many, Dahmer's passing marked the final chapter in a saga of horror that had gripped the nation for years. The legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer continues to provoke reflection on the nature of evil, the vulnerabilities of the human psyche, and the enduring impact of his crimes on society. Conclusion. As we conclude our exploration into the life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, several key points emerge. From his troubled childhood and early signs of disturbance to his chilling reign as the Milwaukee Monster, Dahmer's story forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. The importance of this story lies not only in understanding the mind of a serial killer, but also in examining the societal and psychological factors that may contribute to such extreme behavior. It serves as a stark reminder of the need for vigilance, empathy, and proactive measures to prevent similar tragedies. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues, or experiencing feelings of isolation and despair, please seek help. There are resources available, including hotlines, counseling services, and support groups that can provide assistance and guidance. Understanding and addressing mental health challenges is crucial in creating a safer and more supportive community for everyone. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Jeffrey Dahmer's dark legacy. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing to our channel, liking this video, and leaving your thoughts in the comments below.